Hi, everyone. Welcome to the official start of our live stream right now as we figure all of this out and work out the kinks. I'm Matt Cowan from the Icarus Quartet, and I'll let the rest of the Icarus guys jump in and introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. This is Jeff Stern, one of the percussionists from Icarus.
Hey, I'm Larry, one of the pianists.
And I'm Evgeny, the other pianist, or maybe not the other, another pianist.
And so we're really happy to be here tonight for the first of these Q&As, the Icarus Quartet question and answer sessions. And these are supposed to be kind of casual conversations that connect us with everyone out there in the virtual realm. But we're also looking forward to making many of these include some of our favorite people to either work with or different musicians and different composers that we have different relationships or respect. And for tonight, very apt, as we just talked about before we went live here, the A from IQ&A stands for Akropolis Reed Quintet tonight. And we have Matt and Kari Landry with us, so I'll let them say hi to everyone.
Hey everyone, I'm Kari. I'm the clarinetist of Akropolis Reed Quintet. Matt is the saxophonist. We're also married, a husband and wife. And we're just super psyched to be on this video chat with all you guys. We have known Evgeny for several years. We met him out at Chamber Music Northwest in Portland, Oregon, probably 5 or so years ago. And we've also been fortunate to collaborate with Jeff on percussion as well. So we're just pumped to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. And even though they knew Evgeny, the rest of the quartet met Kari and Matt back almost exactly a year ago, actually, in Yellow Springs, Ohio. There is a series out there called Chamber Music Yellow Springs, and they run an annual competition for emerging professional ensembles. And we were one of the 2 finalists last year, and Matt was on the jury. And after that, we got comments from all the jurors, and Matt's feedback was just incredibly helpful. And we ended up kind of getting close, and we realized how similar, in many ways, our groups are, Icarus and Akropolis. Akropolis has been at this for a few more years than us, and so they're further down the road and have a lot of insight to share with us, and hopefully they'll share some of that with you tonight too. But they're incredible musicians. The things they do as a reed quintet are unbelievable, and in case you haven't heard their music, we'd love to share a little clip. Kari and Matt, what are we about to hear?
So this is a piece of music called Sprocket. This was performed in Detroit. We're from the Detroit area, at a really cool venue called Wasserman Projects. And there's actually a guest percussionist with us. His name's Zach Brew. He's a very well-known local Detroit experimental percussionist, concert maker, really influential artist in Detroit. And so he was the original percussion collaborator on this piece. We did then go on to play it with Jeff at Yale. We've actually given some other performances of it with different percussionists around the country. So this piece is by Stephen Snowden for us, and a really interesting percussion instrument that you guys are about to see in the video. And this is a little bit of the third movement of Sprocket. I think we'll hear about 60 seconds whenever you guys are ready.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Great. That video brings back such good memories of playing that with you guys in New Haven. But it's so cool to see it with the original bike as it was intended, and what a fun piece.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks again for being here, guys. It's really great to have you, and it's gonna be awesome to talk about this stuff. So just a little clarification on this new series. So IQ&A is the neat little name that Jeff came up with. That's going to be our live stream. And so we're going to have a bunch of people coming on in the future weeks. We're going to have different composers that we've collaborated with and different ensembles. So this is the first of it, and thanks for bearing with us as we work out some of the kinks in this first episode.
And as you've probably seen through all the advertisements, this episode is focused on long-distance relationships, and chamber music is really a relationship in many ways. And so we're going to be diving into what that means for the way that we plan for business, the way that we make it work so that when we get together it's as fruitful and successful as groups that spend a lot of time together. And because Akropolis has some members that are not in Michigan, and they've been moving around throughout their career, and just like Icarus kind of spread out after our time in school, we thought it would be a good pairing to share how that works for both of our groups.
Awesome. And we'll kick it over to Yevgeny, who's going to tell a little bit about the transition of the ensemble.
Yeah, so I think that like any long distance relationship, long distance relationships usually don't start long distance. You usually are in one place, and then because of life, you become long distance. And I think a lot of chamber groups that are long distance are like that too. So Icarus Quintet started in school, like I think a lot of groups do. We were formed at Yale School of Music. All of us studied there. We originally actually had a different pianist, not Larry. We're very happy to have Larry with us now, but he was just not there when we were formed. So while we were in school, we were playing chamber music together. We did a bunch of very exciting projects, but then school ended. And so we had a choice to make. We knew that some of us are leaving, some of us are staying. Our other pianist actually to LA to further his education. And so we decided to stay together. Over time, though, we saw that it wasn't really working. And so we looked for another pianist. And after trying out a few and going through this process, we found Larry, who was also a Yale alum. But as life happens, I'm now in Ohio. Larry is in New York. Jeff and Matt are in Baltimore, so no one is actually in Connecticut at this point. So we decided to make this commitment and stay a long-distance ensemble. I know that you guys, Akropolis, also started in school, and then life happened for you guys as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of life happening all the time, but especially to chamber music. So in 2009, I mean, it might even be late 2008, when the group really did its like first rehearsing or whatever. We were undergraduate students at the University of Michigan, so we came from different places before we even started in undergrad, and so that's a lot of the reason why groups are formed in one place, but then they go different places, because when you meet in college, your origins are always in different places, especially at schools like Yale, Michigan, wherever that draw students from all over the place. So for us, the first distancing was grad school. Tim went to Yale, where a lot of our connections kind of come from there. So that was...
Tim knows everyone.
Yeah, well, that's also true. Tim has long distance relationships with
the
everyone.
Entire musical community.
Yeah. And then at about that's just a little bit after that, Ryan went all the way down. Our bassoonist went all the way down to Tallahassee, Florida, to Florida State. And Andrew, our bass clarinetist, Kari, and I have kind of stayed right about here in Southeast Michigan. So for 80-90% of Akropolis's existence, we've been many thousands of miles apart. These days, Tim is now in Colorado, where he teaches. Ryan is sort of between Ohio and Michigan, doing some teaching and life things. So this is actually the closest we've
been in years.
Been in a while. Yeah. Those of you who don't know United States geography, Ohio and Michigan are relative to our usual situation very close. So we've got 4 people, round about a few hour drive, and then we've got somewhere over in. If I was looking outside, he'd be like in the street somewhere. We have Tim out in Colorado. And so that's kind of where we are now, just to give us a baseline for our conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's also, a very common thing, right? You move for jobs because of how the music the academy works. Yeah, exactly. The jobs are so rare that you just move where you have a job. And so it's a very common thing for people, right, to move because of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also, like, I should mention that for us, we also happen to be kind of driving distance apart from each other, even though it's a long ways. Like, so Larry's in New York, Jeff and I are in Baltimore, and then Yevgeny's in Ohio. And so we still make it work. We do the 8-hour drive out to Ohio all the time to do stuff out in Yevgeny's neck of the woods. But it should be said, there are groups who do this where every member has to fly all the time. And so there are ways to make a group work that way as well. And I think a big part of this conversation today is kind of maybe for younger students who are maybe in school and thinking, I maybe want to start an ensemble of my own, but all of my friends are about to graduate and about to spread out all over the world. So there are certainly programs in place and people who do this in all sorts of different ways, and hopefully we can give a little bit of insight to how we've made it work in our various situations. So Jeff's gonna talk about a fun little subject now. You want to kick us off on our hot topic for the day, Jeff?
I want to talk about long distance relationships, Matt. So this is obviously the title of our first episode here, but the reason that we titled it that way was because, chamber music and these groups that we both have are such a big part of our lives. And, the people that you make the music with really matters. And just like Matt was saying, if you're worried about people spreading out or have some different fears about a certain level of commitment and making that deep dive, it's really similar to the way that we date, and a lot of us have found significant others or life partners at schools or various other places along the way, and you kind of just have to go with the moment. There are only so many people in the world that fit you in terms of your personalities and your way of life. And in some ways, I've always thought that finding chamber music partners is almost harder than finding a life partner. Like, you have to be on the same page. I'm going to get in trouble for that one.
That's right. I was just saying, you're walking into risky territory there, buddy.
Hold on. You need to laugh at that.
But,
sorry, Jeff. I agree.
You agree? Okay. At least I've got some support here.
Except Kari and I kind of cheated, so we just sort of
made
the chamber and then got married.
The 2-for-1 deal.
Option C.
But like when you're making music, it's not just about finding the best players and the people that are going to make you sound the best. The people that are going to make you sound the best are the people that you work the best with and can get along with and have a future with. And so, luckily, your significant other doesn't need to be the musician that you need them to be to have a successful career. They don't have to be on the same page business-wise and all that stuff. You guys really lucked out in the way that worked out, and it's really awesome how you guys go through life both personally and professionally. But chamber music is that really intimate level of spending time with people, and so I know many of us have had long distance relationships. I've somehow been kind of a serial long distance relationship member. So I'll say my current fiance, we met when I was finishing up my master's in Baltimore at Peabody, and we spent 2 years apart when I went to Yale and was doing all this stuff with Icarus at that time. And it's the communication and the things that go into that are really similar. And so I think if you can pull a lot of those ideas away they're not really that different when dealing with music. Matt,
I think that one of the reasons why we thought about adding that too is just because this is a situation that almost every musician that I know of has been in some kind, right? So we thought that we could, if you have ever been in a long distance relationship, welcome to being a long distance chamber ensemble. It's sort of the same thing, the ways you have to learn to communicate, okay? Because these signals can get misread because you're not face to face with each other. So all of those things that you remember from being in a long distance relationship, it's exactly the same with the other people that you're in the group with.
Well, I was going to say, Jeff, I like what you said about how the foundations are really important. So a long-term relationship isn't just a relationship where you have something that is like lukewarm, and then you decide, let's make this lukewarm long distance. You want something that has a strong foundation. And so, in other words, the way that Akropolis has always thought about being long distance is that it's really just a manifestation of what we already have in place, or what we built in terms of how we communicate, the trust we have in each other, the way we need to build collective vision for what we're about as a group, the way we come together around a goal, the way we share that goal. So a long distance, the distance itself actually is just a mechanism for how you then go about experiencing that together. If you're in person, you experience it one way. And of course, we all do get together at different times, obviously all the time, really. Well, not now, but usually. But then it's just, again, so it's just a mechanism for a different kind of mechanism for how you express all those same kinds of things. And it has different tools, it has different challenges. It has as many advantages and disadvantages as being together, to be honest. It really does. It's just, how do you want to go about exercising the things you've built as a group? So, and then we talked about how you kind of need to start together. I don't think anybody on the screen would suggest you start something like this long distance, right? You need to have like some kind of incubation period, but that's the time when you are together to build as much of that camaraderie and the trust. And then really when you're long distance, that's what's the glue that's keeping everything together. So that still remains the most important part of being long distance, is the not long distance part of it. Is just the same things that you need to do within to the maintenance of any kind of relationship. And the long distance just determines how you go about doing the communication, which has its own craft behind it, but
Now for you guys, was there ever
right? So the work is all the same. It just depends on how you do it.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Was there ever a question with you guys when the first person kind of took the leap away from Ann Arbor?
Yeah, I mean, so Tim was the first to go, and there was definitely a period of time there when Tim was considering grad school, and he was like, well, I might just move on from Akropolis. I want to explore new things and grow musically. I'm going to Yale. That's pretty awesome, he's so many opportunities ahead of him. And it was that kind of thing where I think he made that decision in his mind for like a split second. And then he said to us like years later, like, well, when I made that choice, like, well, what if I left Akropolis? He realized I was going to miss this so much, and that I would feel like I was like being left out of something that I started that was so cool and personal to me. So he basically just put himself in that mindset of, well, what if I didn't have this in my life? Would I feel like I was missing out on something? And he felt that way. And luckily we had that kind of relationship that Matt was talking about, where we built all that social capital and internal success between all of us, that it wasn't just about like the musical success or the competitions or like CDs or anything like that. It was about like, well, if I'm not with these 5 people, I would probably be pretty bummed, if I saw someone else step into my role. So yeah.
I think if you're in a position of someone like we were describing, where you are one of a couple of people in a group that are splintering off, what you might be saying to yourself is like, what damage am I going to be doing or creating to this situation, or how are they going to be responsive to me? How is this, and in our situation, if you don't talk about it openly, for instance, your assumptions are that there's no way that everybody could be prioritizing what's really important to me, because they're just going to have sludge and angst about the fact that I'm not there. When in actuality, we really, really just wanted Tim to keep playing in the group, and he could have went to Mars, and we would have just decided, how can we continue to make something that he can be proud of, such that he continues to want to be a part of it. And then that really drove us to create a philosophy in the group, that the group should always be something that everybody in Akropolis and outside of Akropolis can be uniquely proud of, and that it should be built in all those images, individually and collectively. And so the distancing actually sort of forced us to have to make the group nimble enough and make adjustments and make decisions artistically and business wise that supported that. And so as a result, the distance actually allowed everybody to really have an experience in the group that reflected them even stronger than if we didn't have to do that, And so Tim going away was the first instance of that, and then it sort of went from there,
I can tell you about Tim. Sorry, I said I can tell you about Tim. I said grads with him, and Akropolis came up in our first conversation. Like, in my mind, Tim was always like, "Oh, the guy from Akropolis, that Quintet." So he was immensely proud, and he loved you guys from the very beginning of his time at Yale. So if he told you anything otherwise, he's lying.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, and awesome. I can also tell you, since we're talking about like personal relationships and everything, Matt and I started dating in like 2010-ish, so very early Akropolis. And I remember having conversations with like Tim and Ryan being like, well, what if you and Matt break up? Like, you guys can't break up, because like then Akropolis will go away. And like, so we legit had conversations about like the exact opposite of a long distance relationship, like how to have like a good, healthy, strong relationship and everything like that. And so those were just some really funny early memories about all of those weird internal mechanisms and how they all came together.
I bet. Yeah, that's a big question when you have two people in a group together. And yeah, I mean, it's part of the group as a relationship and the relationship within the group. So Larry, you want to tell us about some of the benefits for anyone wondering, like, well, why might I want to be a long distance group? Like, why not just do it in person? Like, you want to tell us about that?
Right. Well, I think a lot of that has been covered a bit. I think the most important thing is, as Jeff and Matt have already made it clear, that finding people to work with, it's not just about finding the best musician or the person who can play whatever, but it's about who you can mesh with at a certain level and work together with. And that is not easy. That is not easy on any level, and especially when the group gets, long in the tooth. After the first year or whatever, it becomes very difficult to find people that you can coordinate and cooperate with to make music. It's not easy. And so when you do find people that you can work with, it's something to be cherished and something that you should hold on to. I think that really is, at the end of the day, the impetus for keeping these kind of groups going, because we do find people that we enjoy working with.
During this time, I mean, we haven't really talked about this too much, but obviously we're all living through this crisis, and everyone is kind of feeling a sense of distance, no matter how close they are geographically. And I'm not sure what it was like for you guys when Tim split off, as far as the nature of your communication. I know for us, just finding times to meet up and always having that thing, same as being in a long distance relationship. Right. You never leave the person without knowing the next time you're going to see them. That was always kind of a big rule for me. So you have that next thing to look forward to, and you know how to kind of pace your expectation and pace your waiting
period. That sounds
terrifying.
If only we knew that rule.
You did not need to share that with us. The grocery store. The next time you see me, I'll be downstairs doing laundry. You'll say, those weren't the right tools. Anyway.
No, that's great. And these, we've been using Zoom or Google Hangouts, and those have kind of been lifesavers, even when we're not like producing any kind of musical output, just to feel that sense of connection that we're still making steps as a group. And even, we try to make those meetings as productive as possible and have agendas and be doing things that we can do to capitalize on our time apart, which we'll get into more details of that. But even just the regularity of that, I think is one of the most important things, to just feel like there's some momentum happening and you're always feeling part of the mechanism.
Right, especially now.
I want to jump over to... sorry, go ahead, Matt. You got it.
Oh, I add real quick. What Akropolis is doing right now is actually something that we don't do often, which is we're having like weekly meetings, because usually we travel a lot together. And then what we like to do is actually give everybody as much space as possible. And then we use other mechanisms, mainly Facebook Messenger is a really good way for us to make different threads of things that we can talk about. And then we just have really clear rules for like how to use the different messaging systems for things that are this kind of urgent or this kind of urgent. But when we're not together, we actually usually like don't have meetings. But now that, just because Jeff, you brought up like, okay, but this is a different time. We actually have been like having sort of a semi-standing meeting time, which is sort of like goes back to our first like few years together when we weren't playing enough to justify, we weren't playing enough such that like, what else would we be doing if we weren't talking, either having some kind of meeting about anything, right? So we were meeting just because we just need to stay in touch with each other and stuff. But it's interesting how that's kind of evolved now to a point where we sort of really cherish this just once a week time, and we set it aside just to let it go where it goes. If anybody wants to talk about anything important, they can, but really just to connect with each other still is important. And then if we have like a real serious business meeting we need to have, we make that a different time. And we set that aside for that. So anyway, just to, if that is helpful for anybody to just kind of know how we've been navigating that,
We have a question that popped up here for you guys at Akropolis. So Jade would like you to expand a little bit more. So for the Akropolis folks, can you expand on managing a relationship within a chamber group? Very specific question, but I'm finding more and more people in that situation, myself included. So This is happening to people, and they want to know, how do you do it?
Really happening to people, yeah.
Yourself included, Jade. All right.
Thanks, Jade, for asking. So when we first started out, right, I mentioned that like the other guys in the group were worried as to whether or not, Matt and I would stay together and how serious we were going to get, and whether or not that would help fuel the ensemble or tear it apart or do nothing to it. And we actually have a lot of good friends in ensembles where they did date and then they don't date anymore, but the ensemble is still going amazingly strong. There's a really, really famous string quartet right now with that example. And so it's just, there's no right way or wrong way to do it. And you can do it pretty much every different way imaginable. And the way that, we've kind of been able to manage that and grow both our relationship and then also the ensemble simultaneously is, you have to have basically time where you're doing Akropolis and time where you're doing your quintet and your music. And then you also need to have time that you devote to each other and your other passions and hobbies and other things that you care about in your life. When it all starts to get wound up and together and you can't separate it, that's when you start to, build frustration with each other, and it just doesn't seem to, really feel natural and organic. So the more that Matt and I explored other interests and other, passions outside of playing music together, that really is what brought us closer and ultimately led us to getting married and then buying a house and having 2 dogs and, settling down together. But that's really what I would suggest is figuring out how you guys end up working together in the ensemble and then create other situations outside of the ensemble where it can really flourish.
I would say it's very important regarding the relationship between people I think in any intimate working environment. So like, I think this is also true of we've all seen The Office, but like, it's hard to say The Office without referencing the show, but like I've worked in, as Akropolis was developing, Kari and I had different jobs and stuff. We work for our nonprofit full time now, but we had different kinds of jobs along the way. So I've worked, and I think Kari has too, in some traditional office environments. And even in those, there are workplace relationships and things. And so it's a question of how that relationship interfaces with the rest of the workforce. And in our place, it's sort of a 2 versus 3 kind of thing. And I think it's important for the people who are in a relationship inside of a working group to remember that that's actually a really like privileged thing. To be able to go to work with the person with someone who you admire and who's a friend and someone you love is a situation that unless that just doesn't work, which if it doesn't work, it's not going to happen. It's not going to continue. So we're assuming it's working, right? That is something usually that the other people you work with kind of envy. And of course, envy isn't good and they'll get over that. But it's something that you kind of recognize you're at an advantage. So how can you make sure, sort of take it on your shoulders, and we've done this, to say it's our responsibility to make sure that when we're here working, we're not a married couple, we're not in a relationship. We're working here together toward the same goal that you guys are, and we're going to work really hard, and Kari and I have made it a very concerted effort to make sure that our relationship has absolutely no bearing on rehearsals, on the music we pick, on anything. And in fact, that we've tried to use it as the greatest advantage that we can. Obviously working together all the time, we can get a lot done. Communication's very easy because we share living expenses. That really helped early on with allowing the group to flourish because we basically had like 2 people who could combine together to move the group forward in a business sense, which was more than one person, right? So all these things were there, but I do think it's kind of like your responsibility as the person in that relationship. And I mean, we get to, like, now that we tour a bunch, like, we get to go around the country with each other, and they don't, and so it's our responsibility to make sure that we recognize that, we allow them as much space and time as possible to be with their loved ones, and to realize that we need to keep that out of the business side of the group. Then it goes back to everything that Kari said about, okay, so now it's you and me, and how do we make sure that we leave Akropolis to the side and have a real life, a real relationship? So I hope that's helpful.
No, that seems great. I think you guys touched on a lot of points there. I just wanted to add one more thing under our benefits column to one of the benefits of being a long distance ensemble. And that's that, when you live wherever you want, or you get to move to different places, like you're free to pursue whatever jobs you want or whatever careers you want. I think that it's important to acknowledge that we are all multifaceted musicians with varying degrees of interest in various things. And, it would seem a pity to me if our pianists couldn't go off and play a concerto because they were, we were all tied in this full-time living in the same place Icarus thing all the time. And so it really kind of expands our worlds and our musical possibilities. And then the other side to that is that when as musicians, almost none of us are going to be able to do just one singular thing and be able to make our entire living off of that. Okay, we have to teach, we have to perform, we have to clinic, all of these different things. And that to have those jobs, we have to live in certain places that allow us to do that. And the more fulfilled you are, both artistically by doing many things and financially, just because you can take care of yourself from doing all of these various jobs, that it then makes the group even stronger, right? Because if we were all living in the same place and struggling just to pay rent every month, like, good luck having a good artistic product, right? being healthy in yourself and all of that, we can only do that because we've chosen to live in different places. Anyone have anything to add on that before we go on?
Well, I just want to touch a little bit about what Matt and Kari were talking about with compartmentalizing. It seemed like first of all, you guys do such a great job of that with your relationship. It's really admirable and still easier said than done. And I know you guys do a really great job with that. But also with even the social time that you make time for with Akropolis, I think it's really important, and we're getting some questions in the chat also about being efficient with the little time that we have together. And I think that also just comes down to compartmentalizing and to be able to get some of our social kind of urges out when we're meeting virtually kind of helps us focus when it's time to go to work. But I think I still really group those in two areas. Whenever we're working on new repertoire, I think it's kind of like the social aspect that they were talking about, not really having an end time and just seeing where it goes. I mean, we'll usually get together for about a week to put together one or two new pieces of music. And, obviously there's going to be some boundaries on, when the flights or when we're supposed to get back to our own lives, but it's a pretty open structure, and we give ourselves plenty of time to kind of just get familiar with the music, because sometimes getting familiar with a piece is like trying to get familiar with another person and find out what they're about, and that process can't always be rushed. But then, when we do have our repertoire that we're touring with, we've kind of found certain spots that become our hot spots. The rehearsal process, the initial rehearsal process definitely tells us which things are going to be challenging to put together, and then we'll premiere the piece and immediately find that that one part that we didn't think too much about is actually the hardest part to hear and manage in live performance, either because of adrenaline or the acoustics of a hall, making it really hard to latch on to a quiet moment and find our bearings. And so once we kind of have that experience, we've become really efficient at getting into a hall, knowing the order. For us, with all the percussion setup, we'll always rehearse in backwards order so that we can be preset for the top of the show. Even that half hour of moving stuff around that we can save is critical to our day in the hall. And we just have every piece kind of a checklist of how we need to adapt that section to the room. And sometimes it's playing the whole piece at a completely different tempo. Sometimes it's ignoring the dynamics and just getting it out so that we can hear articulation and survive, because you have to deal with the time that you're given, and at 7:30 you're going to have a downbeat and play that piece of music. So do you guys have any other thoughts on those days?
Well, I just wanted to jump in a little bit on what Jeff said. I think actually what might seem like a disadvantage at first is actually a kind of a strength. It's because the limitations that we have force us to be efficient. You don't have all day, and everyone knows you have all day to do, right? Like right now, you have all day to do whatever you need to do. Nothing gets done really. Yeah, but you have 2 hours to finish something, it's done. And that's the things that we found getting into our especially intensive weeks where we need to put together a program. Things have to move because we really don't have a choice. And once you're put into those circumstances enough, it really refines not only your time management, but what works, what kind of rehearsal techniques are going to be efficient for what pieces, and how the four of us kind of can manage our time collectively.
I'll just say to close that out, at Akropolis, if we all lived in the same town, we would rehearse no more or less than we do now. I really don't. I don't think we. I mean, we would probably find a little bit of extra time to maybe get together to maybe just explore some music for the sake, like you guys were saying, like just let's have some open time which is also time that we schedule to be open time, just like you said, Jeff. But we wouldn't. I don't think our rehearsal patterns or performance patterns would change at all, to be perfectly honest. And that might be a little bit strange for like a young group to hear, but a lot of times when we travel around and young groups ask us, how do you put stuff together? It's like when you're in college, I think students spend too much time. They give themselves too long to learn pieces. They give themselves, they don't have enough. It's too difficult to see the finish line. It's too difficult to create parameters when there aren't enough parameters, just like Larry was saying. So anywho, just a little insight. If that seems kind of surprising to people, I hope that kind of helps understand where you're going and where you want to get to with how efficient you can be. And that isn't just efficiency in like how talented you are in playing music and learning it quickly. It's your planning and how ready you are and how much work people are doing before they get to the space. All these things to rehearse together, all these things are what the long distance really helps. It's kind of this crucible that really just brings all the best out of everyone to get the most that they can out of the time that they're together.
Yeah, I remember one of my teachers saying one time that when you're doing in a chamber setting and you're wondering what the problem is, 90% of the time the problem is a lack of preparation on someone's part. That whatever is the issue could be fixed with just someone working. And I think that one of the things about being a long distance ensemble is you kind of realize that, and that you fix all of those things ahead of time because you don't have the time to waste by not being efficient. So you acknowledge that is where a lot of problem lies, and then you just make that a non-issue when you come together.
Yeah, Matt, did you say there were some questions that we just
wanted? So let's go over. We got a couple in here that we should hit on. From Clay, Clay asked, "How do you go about planning and creating projects while in different locations? Where do you start with planning a project?" I feel like Jeff, maybe we can throw this over to you to start, and then pass it over to the Akropolis guys.
Google Docs.
Google Docs.
No, that really has saved us immensely, but I feel like my whole life is spent on Google Drive nowadays. I think the most important part is just having a structure and having a point person for everything. Even in a quartet, there is such a thing as too many cooks in the kitchen, and the lines of communication just have to be really clear. And so a lot of times the conversation for projects will start with one of us and a composer we're interested in working with, or one of us on a venue we're interested in performing at. And from there, that person only really brings back to the group the things that are necessary to talk about with the group. And often times those conversations have already happened before we approach a composer. For instance, we've already talked about the pieces that we're going to pair that new piece with, the instrumentation that we're going to ask that composer to write for, and the aesthetic that we're looking to hopefully draw out of them to add to the palette of the program. So I think the most important part, to boil it down, is to be on the same page before you even get engaged in it, and then let someone kind of take the reins and report back, and it can become a natural process from there.
I think it's also important, and I think for us as a quartet, it's a relatively new thing for us, a new revelation. And I think some people don't mind or like taking the lead and doing like admin work, and some people are really not interested in it. And I think it's important to be open about it, because if you're going to have members of a group that are unhappy, it's not good for anyone. And so I think you should really try to be open about it. Of course, there's always going to be sacrifices, and you should, if you want to be a part of a group, you should have your own sacrifices for it, and everyone should contribute in the way that they can. But I don't think that if you're in a quartet or in a quintet, each person has to do exactly a fourth or fifth of all the work that's being done. I think it's okay to divide up the work in any way that you see appropriate.
I feel like for me, this comes back to that same analogy we were using of relationships earlier. It's like, if you count who did the dishes this time, or how many times you did the dishes this week, and how many times the A did the dishes this week, like, that's never going to lead to a healthy thing. So it's like the 4-way split or the 5-way split. Like, I don't think that's necessarily healthy for an ensemble either. Everyone needs to be willing to do their part and needs to be honest about, I'm okay doing this, I'm not okay doing this. And figure out a way that works for you, how to split stuff up. But keeping tallies, for me, probably not a healthy way to go about it. I don't know. What do you guys think, Akropolis?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
Totally agree.
And I would say, you know,
I
as far
do
as
dishes.
all projects are long distance. So these days, if you want to work with like a really great artist, you want to work interdisciplinarily, you want to work with a venue, it's almost all long distance, especially in the classical world, because venues that can support and institutions and funding that can support really expensive projects are in certain areas. They're not everywhere, and they're often not where you are. And so it's a good idea to have a point person. It's a good idea to have someone who rallies interests and moderates for the group and such. And so in Akropolis, it's a similar way. Kari and I carry the majority of the administrative burden. And so that allows things to happen quickly. And so, but again, just to reiterate, like, how do you do a project long distance? A project for Akropolis will take 1.5 years or 2 years to put together. And then you perform it for the first time over a week period, and then you can tour it for however long you want. But 99% of it is long distance. And then the 1% of getting together and actually doing it, the funding is long distance, all the logistics, all of the venue coordination, the programming, you know, everything. So
I just have a quick thing to add to when it comes to like planning for an actual project, is that very rarely does Akropolis sit down and say, we are going to plan for this very one specific thing. What we really like to do is have more open-ended categories of, say, like a massive list of composers that we may someday want to commission, or a big list of artists that we might want to collaborate with, or places we might want to go, or things that we want to accomplish. And then when you have kind of this arsenal of balls that you can juggle, then one day something is going to fit perfectly with a situation, and you can have all these ideas that you can pull from, rather than sitting down in a complete vacuum and saying, all right, guys, let's think of our next awesome project. Because very rarely is that going to be something built out of a long-term want or desire. And then I have one other little thing that I would encourage people to look up. And I'll show it on my screen. It'll be backwards. But this is from a book called Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And this is a life cycle of a project. And you can just look up this book and this graphic online. But essentially, a project starts with being, this is the best idea ever. And then it progressively gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And then at the bottom of the graph, it says, dark soul of the night. And then eventually the graph goes up a little bit. And then it ends with, it's done and it sucks, but it's not as bad as I thought it was. So I think one of the hardest things in finishing a project is oftentimes, you know, the project doesn't actually go on that trajectory of what you thought it was going to be. And then a lot of times people just give up on these great ideas rather than seeing them through, even if it changes and even if it transforms. So I think just having a mindset of knowing that a project you start is never going to end up the way that you thought it was actually going to be. And you should just keep going and finish it.
Sure, and embrace that fact of like whatever it turns into.
Yeah.
We have another really interesting question that's specific to Akropolis, and someone wants to, let's see, this is from Lauren. It says, how do you go about practicing things like intonation and blend from a distance? Is there something that is saved for those mega rehearsals before a performance, or does that just come together over time?
Yeah. Well,
naturally perfect.
So both, both, I guess. There is a definite need for having extensive periods of time playing together. But I would say that when we have retreats such where we can play for 4 or 5 days in a row, I don't know if that creates intonation improvement. I think it just creates a lot of fatigue. We use those periods to get to know music, to work on a lot of organizational things, to try stuff, and just to have a lot more time playing together. Intonation as a group and some of the real nitty gritty work of establishing your blend as an ensemble, which is, for you guys, I know in Icarus, that's just huge. In fact, intonation is sort of the one thing you don't really have to worry about. But on the other hand, you have to worry hyper about like everything else. And that happens for us by playing music together a lot. So you learn more about intonation and blend through performances. It's very difficult to learn how much progress you're making on intonation and blend in a rehearsal. What I would encourage emerging groups to do is to create performing opportunities. It doesn't matter how many people come. It doesn't matter if it's high profile. Playing in a place that you care about for people you care about, and getting yourself out there and playing a lot. That's how we improve these things. So then as it comes to long distance, yes, we did have a lot of time playing together before we all broke apart. But now a lot of the onus, there is individual work that's very important to playing in tune. Playing in tune is very much a process of listening and making hyper adjustments and having a great ear and all that, and cooperation and teamwork is huge for intonation, and communication is huge for intonation, because if there's an intonation problem, someone has to either verbally or non-verbally address it. And that's really, really important to learn how to do that. But it is just as much an individual thing, learning how on your instrument to play your instrument in tune. But Akropolis also has a philosophy on how, we think tuning should go, and everybody has to ascribe to that and practice that on their own. And every group's going to have a slightly different one. It's okay to play high here. It's okay to play low here. For the last couple of years, we've been really, really trying to strategize around everybody playing at the center of pitch, which I know sounds like, why wouldn't you do that? But as wind players, it's very, very hard to play a lot at pitch. So we've actually been making that a personal goal of everybody's. And then when we get together, we continually measure that. We pick times when we're going to measure it and times when we're not, when we're just going to listen. And so the individual work is very important, and there is long distance work you can do. You can work incessantly on your own with being as predictably in tune on your own as possible. And you can know your tendencies extremely well, and that will help when you get together. So I hope that's helpful.
I'll just kind of add that some of the things that we've done individually over the last couple years is we've all tried to work on some of the same pitch exercises between the five of us, so that we're all using the tuner in the same way, we're all using drones in the same way, and we're all practicing the same things. And then it's also really important to know the individual intonation tendencies of the other members in the ensemble. So like if I'm playing something with Matt, I know that those notes for him are a certain tendency, and he knows that those notes for me are a certain tendency. So by having that kind of like playbook of everybody's tendencies, then you can get to in tune with each other a lot faster than if you have no idea, that low notes on the bass clarinet are going to do one thing and high notes on the bassoon are going to do something else. So all of those things can be predicted from a long distance. You don't have to be in person to know those things.
I would also say, so Evgeny, you mentioned like in how you parse out work and how everybody contributes to an ensemble from like just an organizational perspective. That honesty and openness in communication on what you need to be successful is the most important thing. An ensemble will only play in tune as well as it can communicate its intonation problems with each other and can support each other in how it is as much a question of interpersonal communication and understanding as it is a question of your physical abilities and your oral abilities, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm.
I just have one thing I want to add to that, sort of thinking as that question was coming up, I was thinking, what is our equivalent of that? And is things like, I think, like you said, things like balance or things like rhythm. And one of the ways that I've tried to approach this as we get together for these shorter periods of time is that at least at the beginning of playing a piece together or putting a piece together, until you've kind of found exactly what you want to do with the balance, that I try to experiment constantly. So when we're doing a brand new piece, I try to voice myself differently every single time. And so that I can finally find like, oh, that's the one. Or maybe it's the other guys in the group that say, that sounded way better that time. And that points me toward, okay, I think I'll balance it that way. And so early stages of coming together, for me, it's just try every possible variation of, again, for us, that would be balance until you find what works. And then you can kind of solidify those things. But you learn how to work very efficiently in that process as well. So I can get to that ideal balance much quicker now than I used to when I was in school, because I've just learned a different process. And from being in this group where we have less of the personal time or the in-person time to put it together, you find how to get that in less time.
It's amazing how much better you at all these things by playing with these other people, right? You make improvements on your ability to do these amazing micro adjustments in rhythm and in voicing and things that you guys have to do, even voicing, within your own mallets and your own fingers and your own, that's one thing we don't have to work. And you get there by working on them together as a group. I mean, it's no doubt that the four of you and the nine of us are so much further along in our ability to do these things on our own because of playing with each other. It's just something that nobody can teach you the way that playing in a small group can. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I think
cut you off.
I think one thing that I kind of wanted to add was that one of the keys, I think, to good rehearsal and making or taking advantage of the time that we do have is everybody leaves ego at the door. I think that's a really important thing, and to learn how to do that, to go in and say, okay, we have X, Y, and Z things to do. Let's get it done. It's not about who's right, there's no blame, just simply the task at hand and getting to it, which is difficult. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to accomplish, and especially when you add multiple other people and you're trying to work together, it becomes very easy to kind of add a lot of stress to the situation, especially if you only have some certain amount of time to get it done. But and what I found most special with working with these guys is just that, is that there's really never any kind of drama when we rehearse. It's just we need to get it done and get it done.
And I think that is something that a lot of groups, whether they're long distance or not, aspire to. But I actually do believe that being a long distance ensemble helps us with that, because when you see each other every day, so like for all the groups, and sometimes I find myself being jealous of those groups. Like, oh, I wish we could rehearse every day. But a lot of those groups do fight with each other because there's a lot more time to get your feelings hurt when you see each other every day, and there's no time for us to get our feelings hurt. And so that we really don't. I don't know that we've ever really had problems with that. I think that's something about that is about being long distance. Sorry, go ahead.
After of Akropolis, I'm not interested in seeing everybody every day.
Yeah. That excludes.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so I want to move on. We've got some more questions coming in, which are awesome, and I want to get to these for sure. But we're going to go down to the question of what do we do when we're together? And so we're going to look at what are some of the things that our groups do or that we prioritize when we are actually together. Because as we've said, like, we don't get to be together as much as groups that live in exactly the same city. So what do we do? I'll let Yevgeny head that one off.
Well, I think it really depends on where we are in the process of our either tour or with an EP. So as you said at the beginning of a piece, if we decide that we have this week before or a few days before a concert to work on a new piece, then really that's pretty much our focus throughout. But I think there are a lot of other things that we do when we are together. One thing we found, I found pretty interesting, is we, for instance, meet up to record something. If we don't then stay for a few days in town to edit the thing together, it will never get done. And that's actually quite an advantage when you have something so fresh in your ear and you actually spend 2 days just editing and you just get it over with. I think that's a very efficient thing to do. Other things that we do when we're together, which I love, is residencies. And I know Akropolis does a lot of those too, where you just go to university. For us, it's as a piano percussion quartet, it's especially important because getting two pianos and percussion instruments is much easier at a university setting. So often when we go to university, it is for a full residency where we get to work with students and present our program and maybe read some composer pieces. So I find that our activities when we're together are extremely varied. And I think, if we're living in the same place, we would probably be in sort of a rut where every day would be the same. While in our situation, every time is something different.
I think that one of the important things too is that Yevgeny didn't mention yet is when we do get together, that we rehearse really hard, probably harder than I do the rest of the year. Like we get out of the car, we get off the plane, and then we go, and we don't take a break until it's done. And so and yeah, those are very intense days, but I think that they're necessary for what we do, and we find a way to make it work. And whenever we're at a new place playing a concert, people are always amazed by that. They think it's crazy that we just got off a whatever hour flight and then we go rehearse for that many hours. But it's kind of become one of the things that's necessary for us, and that we're willing to do, is that when we are together, we make sure that we put in a crazy amount of hours, because we're not together all the time, and we have to try to, that's one of the things that we can't do when we're apart. We can't do the live rehearsal, and so we have to make that happen when we do get together. What about you guys at Akropolis? What are some more specific things that you make sure to either put off until I shouldn't say put off, but what do you do when you are together that you maybe don't do apart?
Yeah, I'll just kind of add a little wind reed player tidbit in there, is especially now since we have been traveling so much over the past few years, and now that Tim lives in Elevation in Colorado, and back when Ryan lived in Tallahassee, which was a completely different climate, we had to learn very quickly that everybody needs individual time with their reeds before we can even start having a group rehearsal. And if we don't give people that time, then a productive group rehearsal isn't going to happen, because everybody's reeds aren't ready. They haven't been adjusted to the place that we're in. So kind of like Yevgeny talked about building time after something to do the edits, we'll build time into our touring so that we can get to places sooner and do all of that individual work or preparation that might be needed. As the single reed players, and with Andrew on bass clarinet, we're fortunate that we don't have to do as much as Ryan and Tim have to do. But so that's been something that, we have to be very conscious of with the members of the ensemble, especially when we're on the road.
Yeah, so we try to make sure so much of what makes being together effective is how we contextualize why we're getting together, and that the reason we're getting together is specific and everybody understands why it's so important. And that allows the time we're together to be productive and allows it to not be too exhausting, because we know what we need to accomplish. And we know that as long as we accomplish that, everybody can relax and have a life while we're traveling. We get together for a few different reasons, primarily to perform and do residencies like you guys. Then we set aside a couple of times a year to get together to play, but not for the public. We also get together for our festival for 2 weeks in Detroit. That requires a little bit of preparation, and then we're here for that, which is 14 events that we do and put on. Then we do get together separately, sometimes attached to other things, but sometimes separately as well, to record. Usually that happens here in Michigan. Sometimes we'll attach time onto touring engagements, so we have one gig here, and then since we're all together, let's use this time to maybe there's this hall available and we can make a really cool video or something like that. So it's often time that we just try to make the use of when we're together as much as possible, I'd say. Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone want to add anything to that? Any of the Chris guys, the other things we didn't touch on, that stuff that we do together or wait to do until we're together?
Drink a lot of coffee.
Drink a lot of coffee.
That's not what
Well, actually, the other thing that I did mean to say that I forgot about was we make sure to spend the time hanging out with each other too, because that is one of the elements that you do miss a lot from not being an in-person ensemble, is that we just don't get to see each other very much. And we're really good friends, and we really like hanging out with each other. And honestly, the closer bond that we have as friends, no one would I think contest this, that the better you play when that's the situation. So it's really important for us to also have some time to hang and catch up with each other. and just continue to grow that friendship. Because in a lot of times, I think everyone out there who's a musician, I think, can remember a time where you maybe chose to have a social time with your chamber ensemble instead of rehearsing, and that social time actually did way better than 5 hours of rehearsal would have. It's definitely a thing. Definitely happens.
Yeah.
Cool. And then let's go back and let's grab another question now. So let's go. This question comes from Chase. And Chase asks, have you all dealt with a loss of motivation due to current world events, not just as individuals, but as an ensemble, and how do you deal with it? So I'll chime in on this one first, which is that one of the interesting things in planning this discussion today was we kind of realized that all ensembles right now are long distance ensembles. So the thing that we've all been doing for years in how we plan and how we communicate, even for those groups that do live in the same area, they're not able to rehearse or able to plan like they always have. And so everyone is kind of doing things in the same way. And so as far as the current situation, the current climate with everything being closed down, is that we've all had, Akropolis, I'm sure you guys have had setbacks. We have had setbacks, and they're really unfortunate, but they're happening to everyone everywhere. And so I haven't felt actually a loss of motivation anyway, in almost the opposite, that I feel more motivated to, maybe I have a little bit more free time to do some of the things with Icarus and for Icarus that I've always wanted to do and maybe was too busy to do before. And then other than that, things have kind of felt the same to us because we always communicate over Zoom and we always have these weekly meetings. And so things have stayed the same for us in that way. So I personally don't feel that loss of motivation, if anything, inspired to create more things. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I think the motivation has in some ways mainly just shifted gears over to the administrative side and taking care of a lot of emails or organizational things we're getting set up right now for our nonprofit status and things like that. And there's so many things that get put to the side when you're moving around in the normal swing of life. But the other thing I just want to say for everyone out there is I think that no matter what you're feeling motivation-wise, that it's okay. And I find myself going back and forth kind of even day to day with how much I'm, thinking about the future and the opportunities that we're missing out on as an ensemble. We've had 3 events canceled so far, and those have been, hard to deal with, and we're trying to reschedule them. But we're not sure what even the next many months are going to look like, and there's no kind of way around thinking that that's not an easy thing. So our recording session got put off. That was also a hard pill to swallow. And the summer events that we have coming up, we don't have any certainty, and I think that's the hard thing about all of this. So we're just trying our best to channel our energy in any productive way possible, trying to connect with you guys through doing things like this, and connecting through social media, getting some more materials out there, and trying our best day by day. So, but I appreciate you bringing that up because it's a real issue.
Yeah. I think you guys have talked very, very elegantly about it. I think so much motivation comes extrinsically, and we are so inspired by walking around, by going to concerts, by being in people's presence. And so, I totally agree. It's okay to be feeling a little bit down right now, but I do think, like everything, you need to talk about it with people. And then as you do start to connect or reconnect, you will then start to feel motivation come back by having conversations, and not necessarily by watching other people have conversations. Though we do appreciate everybody listening, but by maybe being inspired by what you're seeing here to just make some connections, talk to people, and it doesn't have to be, it can just be open-ended. Just, I've set up more calls and meetings with people over the last 3 or 4 weeks than I ever would have. And it's really, it's required of me do that in order to continue to be motivated, I think, right now. So I think that's a great question.
All right. Well, I think we've been going for about almost an hour 20 now, and I think we should start to wrap it up. But I don't know. I just thought that we could maybe do some last thoughts on being a long distance ensemble and kind of what that means for you guys as an ensemble, and anything else that we really want to add to this. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, like, what exactly, we've touched on many parts of this already, but what can you do from afar in order to ensure your success? And there are certain things that in sort of Zoom conversation or any sort of Skype call that you can do that I find to be extremely effective even from afar. And so we've had to come to terms with an ensemble of deciding how we want to define our success. Okay, so we found that you can still have these really honest, open conversations that are so important to ensembles, or just over this platform rather than just being face to face. And so we do a lot of our long-term planning this way and making sure that we are all on the same page as far as who we are as a group and what we want to achieve, and then trying to work toward that, and I guess defining our success based on those goals, and not how do we stack up against groups that aren't long distance, but did we achieve what we set out to as an ensemble?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm glad you brought that up. And I also want to make sure we don't leave this conversation without talking about Mastermind. We have a long distance opportunity from Akropolis Reed Quintet, and I think as we continue to work our way through this period, we're going to be finding more ways to apply technology and put our resources, channel them differently, and I think you guys have an amazing opportunity for some people out there.
Yeah. If anybody's interested and has been inspired to learn more about what Akropolis offers emerging ensembles in terms of the full development of your career, we actually created a 1 week fully online music business intensive. And actually, we had the idea for this, I have to say, all the way back last summer. Kari and I finally, after many years of thinking about all the work that we had done, coaching college students and doing entrepreneurship workshops, what would we like to provide? And so we started almost a year ago planning our first really intense week-long but completely remote workshop. And initially the idea of doing it remotely was just to make it accessible to everyone. So students who attend this don't have to pay. The tuition is very affordable, much more affordable than almost, as far as we know, every in-person summer thing that you can do as a young musician. But also there's no travel or anything like that. So it is a very, it's a big commitment for the week that you're involved, because you're going to be doing this like a lot and learning a lot and meeting with all the different participants, but you can do it from the comfort and now the safety of your home. So it's we have a website, of course, that people can visit. So they can just go to our website, which is akropolisquintet.org, and then there's a little mastermind tab at the top. And then maybe, Kari, we can throw it in the YouTube chat. Yeah. But essentially, the mastermind, we're going to have 10 participants, and they can be ensembles or soloists. And then we also have 5 really, really amazing, influential guests from the field of contemporary and classical music that are going to make up the whole cohort that's going to learn from us, from the guests, and from each other.
And I'll just kind of add one little thing to kind of tie it into everything long distance and what we've been talking about tonight. And really the inspiration behind us doing the mastermind and all these kind of talks is that, when you're young and you're starting out as an ensemble, you really kind of feel like there's no roadmap out there for you. You feel like you're the only one doing the situation that you're in, or maybe that there aren't a lot of other people who have experienced what you're experiencing. And what we found just by having these conversations with all of these people in the industry and with people like you guys is that there are way more similar experiences than there are different experiences. So seeking out that mentorship from people and from your colleagues, you can really see that there is a pretty straightforward roadmap to having a successful career in chamber music, and you can pull from all these different experiences in order to kind of build your own successful roadmap. And more often than not, that involves long distance, that involves all these other things, but I think it's really important to just realize that people have come before you and they have done this, and there's so many resources out there that so many people can share with you.
So at the end of the mastermind, at the end of the week, all the participants walk away with that roadmap for themselves, and that does involve the financial planning, marketing, sort of vision-oriented side of things, programming, and this is all with the help of Akropolis, and then with all the other ensembles and soloists that they get to interact with, and then with our guests, of course. So thanks, Jeff, for letting us plug that. We appreciate it. And actually, the application deadline is May 1.
Yep.
So I think that's not this Friday, but next.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much to Matt and Kari for joining us. So glad you guys could be here. And this is episode 1 of IQ&A with members of Akropolis. So thank you again, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll let you know when the next one comes up. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Woo!
Bye, guys.
All right, bye everybody.